It's no secret that I am a huge fan of Studio Ghibli. Spirited Away was the first Ghibli film I saw at about 8 or 9 years old, and from then on I was absolutely hooked. So when I arrived at the Studio Ghibli theme for my 20 Illustrations challenge last year, I was beyond excited. This was an opportunity to create a little tribute painting to the studio that has provided me with endless inspiration over the years. But as I sat down to start brainstorming, I hit a little bit of a snag. What was really the purpose of this theme? Was I simply trying to create something in a Studio Ghibli style, or was I trying to convey what these movies actually mean to me? And if that was the case, then what does Studio Ghibli mean to me? These aren't simply fun anime movies. They're folklore and hand-painted backgrounds. They're full of found family tropes and love letters to nature. They're soul-touching soundtracks, soft world-building, and bite-sized pieces of magic. There is so much to them, but I needed to find a common element across all of them. For this illustration, I wanted to dive deeper and figure out what common element really touches me the most in all of these movies. And the answer I realized was simple. Every Studio Ghibli movie has these kind of mundane moments. Chihiro eating a rice cake, Satsuki and Mei waiting at the bus stop, or Kiki grocery shopping. These very simple life things that literally everyone can relate to, but they're so beautifully romanticized. My guess is most of us haven't actually waited at a bus stop with a giant troll standing beside you playing in the raindrops, but Studio Ghibli still manages to evoke this sense of nostalgia and make you feel a kind of deja vu for these experiences. They take these real-life mundane moments and they make them cozy and magical. So there's this line in a song from the musical Ordinary Days that describes this absolutely perfectly. The song says, "The point is that things aren't beautiful all on their own. Beautiful comes from reflection. Beautiful takes a person who makes a connection. For beautiful to happen, the beautiful has got to be seen." And that's what Studio Ghibli does. They look at these ordinary moments and they find the beauty in them. So that was my goal for this painting, to illustrate an ordinary moment in a beautiful and cozy way. Now I'm not gonna lie, the sketching process for this one was tedious. Y'all know, I don't do vehicles. I don't drive them, I don't draw them. That's kind of a lie, I am practicing driving more, but I digress. Vehicle anatomy makes absolutely no sense to my brain, and usually I'm fine with that. If I simply avoid it, it's not a problem. But for some reason, I really wanted to paint a girl and her little doggo sidekick on a Vespa, and thought that that was within my realm of capabilities. Now I'm here to tell you, it was not. So, I began studying Vespas. Sketching, and more sketching, and probably crying, I don't remember. Finally, once I felt that I was getting the hang of it, I did a couple of thumbnails to kind of map out where I wanted all of the elements of this piece to be, threw it into Krita, and finalized the sketch. Let's take a little walk through my brain space, shall we? It's kind of my pipe dream to live in a little town in Ireland and have a little yellow Vespa that I can ride around on in the countryside. So this illustration is sort of me living vicariously through this character. And I think that's one of the coolest things about being an artist, is we can paint these adventures we want to have and all of these places that we want to see. The reality is, maybe I'll never have a yellow Vespa and go cruising the countryside, but I've explored a little piece of that idea through my artwork. And that's really what art is. It's taking those experiences that you've had and the experiences that you want to have and turning them into something tangible that others can enjoy too. Kind of like a visual diary of sorts. And speaking of taking inspiration from real life experiences and things, the little doggo in this painting is an ode to Annie Jane. I couldn't capture her cuteness in the painting. I
don't think that's physically possible,
but I tried. So, one of the things I've discovered recently is that I really don't know how to draw dogs.
Like, at all.
Especially if they turn their heads and their muzzles start to tilt. Oh boy. Total confusion and chaos. So as I've been working through my art intention for January, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we chat more about that in this last video. As part of my way of meeting my sketchbook intention, I've been doing a lot of dog sketching. And you know what? They've been rough.
Please don't unsubscribe.
Anyways, but I think slowly but surely I'm understanding the anatomy a little bit better. Like anything, it takes a lot of practice and doing it over and over and over again. Which I'm not gonna lie is sometimes hard for me. I prefer to be immediately good at things when I try them, but that's rarely the case. popping in to share my newest mystery grab bag with y'all.
The jumbo bag.
This is for the ones craving all the cozy things. Each bag has an 8x10 art print, a sticker sheet, and 5 die-cut stickers. If you're interested in snagging one of these bags for yourself, I have 5 available in my shop via the link in the description. And now, back to the video. So let's talk a little bit about the painting process here. Because Studio Ghibli always has a lot of plant life in their backgrounds, I really wanted to take the opportunity to do a bit of plant practice in this one. I also wanted to do that kind of cloudy, bright blue sky as an ode to some of these Ghibli shots. I struggle quite a bit with creating depth in my paintings, especially when it comes to landscapes, really just trying to get more of that atmospheric perspective so mountains and trees recede in space more. I decided to take advantage of the wetness of the paper and try to get most of the background elements down first so they could kind of blend together and create a little bit more of that hazy effect. I also used the wet on wet technique for the grass in the midground and the road. Y'all have heard me say this many times, and you will hear me say it many times more. Wet on wet is such a great technique because you can lay down a lot of color and value very quickly and start to get a better sense for the painting. It's a way to begin building up the colors and values in a piece and starting to understand those relationships without jumping in too quickly with a lot of details. I forgot to mention, I was painting this one without a color key, so covering a lot of ground quickly and getting a better sense for the color and value relationships throughout the piece was extremely important. Can you start with one area and render it out to completion before touching any other part of the piece? Sure, but for me, that method doesn't really work super well. And that's one of the brilliant things about the creative process. It's so unique to each person, and there are so many different ways to tackle an illustration. Because the Vespa and the characters are the main focal point, I went into that next. I knew the Vespa would be yellow, but I didn't really know how that would play with the color of the ground around it. Next, I moved on to painting the character, and this is where things started to take a turn, and I had a little bit of a meltdown. Now, I have 3 main problems with drawing and painting human characters. Number 1, I don't fully know how I like to draw them. Some of this comes from not having studied anatomy enough to know what all is going on under the skin, and the other part of this is I simply haven't done enough sketches to understand my own tastes. I tend to flip-flop between more childlike or doll-like proportions with very exaggerated larger heads and squishier bodies, and more adult characters with more realistic proportions. Problem number 2, I don't quite know how I like to render characters. Like with the proportions, I'm not super consistent with this. Sometimes they lean more cartoony, focusing more on exaggerated gestures and fewer rendered details, and sometimes I lean a little bit more realistic with more defined bones and muscles. And problem number 3, I have no idea how to treat skin tones with gouache. My characters always come out kind of gray and dead, which,
it's not super appealing.
I also tend to paint faces way too thickly too quickly, and I have a really hard time going back in to correct things because the layers underneath start to reactivate. Needless to say, it's not a good time, and I got very frustrated very quickly painting this particular character. I think this is definitely a sign that I need to sketch and paint more characters to kind of get a better feel for things, but that's a concept I kind of dread, I'm not gonna lie. That said, I have been doing a lot more character sketches in my sketchbook, and I think I'm learning a little bit more about my own character aesthetics. Anywho, next we moved on to the fence. Like I talked about in my last video, I really love wood, and I actually have a really fun time painting it. I especially love playing around with the different textures. One of my favorites for creating bark textures and plank grains is dry brushing. It is such a fun and kind of unpredictable way to bring texture to something. Once we finally got to the plant painting portion of the process...
Dude, that was a lot of peas. A+ for alliteration.
Anywho, once we got to that part, it was very therapeutic. I could just sit and build up all these different variations of plants around the fence line, in the road, in the foreground. I think this is really when the whole illustration kind of started to come together. Studio Ghibli has so much variation in their plant life, and I really wanted to challenge myself to play around with a lot of different shapes. One of the things that always amazes me about Studio Ghibli backgrounds is how it feels like there's a lot going on, but it's actually a lot of simple shapes just kind of layered together. There are areas that are treated with more detail, which kind of help our brains put together the information in the less detailed parts of the backgrounds. The background artists are so skilled at creating a lot of depth and variety while also keeping it fairly simple at the same time. They have truly mastered the art of nuance, and that's definitely something I aspire to in my own artwork. I tend to go kind of ham with rendering, and the rendering is not done very well, mind you, which usually ends up in a big muddy mess where nothing really stands out. Let's look at the scene from The Secret World of Arrietty. Now there is a lot of greenery. We immediately get a clear read that there's a lot of grass, a lot of trees, a lot of bushes, and smaller plants. But if you really look at any one of these sections, they really aren't all that complex. The artist hasn't rendered out the veins of every leaf, or rendered out every leaf for that matter. This bush over here is a dark shape laid over a darker shape, with a little bit of texture around the edges and a few purple flowers. This section over here looks like a lot of different plants, but we're really only seeing a few groupings of differently shaped leaves. We know this in here is all grass, but the artist hasn't painted in every blade of grass, only a few here and there. But no one can look at this painting and not see a wide variety of depth and plant life. But that's because the artists are so skilled at creating that depth and detail without really adding that many details at all. Anywho, this is one of those things that I find completely fascinating about Studio Ghibli backgrounds, and it's definitely something I keep studying and practicing to one day achieve in my own paintings. I'm not there yet by any means, but practice makes progress. I've really been enjoying going through this art book of Kazuo Ogo's work from some of the Studio Ghibli movies. It's really interesting seeing how he goes about layering plant life in his own illustrations. I definitely recommend this book, so good. You will need to use the Translate app on your phone though if you can't read Japanese.
I, for one, cannot.
So what else is new? We're currently finishing up January, which is bizarre. Where has the month gone? I've been keeping pretty busy with my sketchbook, obviously, but I also started Justin Donaldson's gouache course this month. It's going really well, and I know a few of you are also taking it, which is super fun. Justin does a really good job of making it accessible to beginners at gouache, as well as people who've been using gouache for a while. I think one of the most interesting parts about the first week was going through the gouache basics. It's very similar to restudying the fundamentals of art because there's so much that you kind of just overlook. Like, you can know the information, but you can also sort of forget that you know it. I'm not gonna lie, the first assignment had me sweating. We were doing this still life study, practicing getting these large, consistent blocks of color. The point was not to have a beautiful, fully rendered study, but to paint these consistent, simple shapes. Sounds fairly easy, right?
Wrong.
Sometimes the most simple exercises are the most difficult because you can't focus on the aesthetics. You can't go in and cover everything up with a lot of pretty details. The point is to practice the technique, and that's humbling to even the most masterful of gouache artists. Justin himself had some problems to work through in the demo. Honestly, I think that's one of the things that I love most about the course, is he's not afraid to fail in front of his students. Instead, he shows us how to work through these problems that will inevitably come up in our own paintings. I've also really been enjoying being in my sketchbook more. It's definitely becoming more of a habit again, which is really exciting. I find myself reaching for it more often without those thoughts of,
well, what if it doesn't turn out how I want it to?
Or,
I don't even know what I want to sketch.
I'm getting back into the feel of things and can sketch more intuitively again. And I love that. You know, I absolutely love making these more cinematic gouache illustrations with lots of story behind them, but I also really love just filling my sketchbooks with lots of happy little sketches. It's a way for me to explore ideas and get them done quickly without really worrying about having them fully finished. Some of my favorite illustration ideas are born out of these types of sketches where I'm just sitting down, snuggled up with Annie Jane, and letting the pencil lead the way. I'm very happy to say that my dog sketches are getting a little bit better too. I recently watched this Proco video about how to sketch structures better, and let me tell you, that has improved every aspect of my sketching practice. I'm finding perspective easier, and I'm finding it easier to break more complex things, such as dogs, into simpler shapes. Doing some of these structure sketches is also a really great warm-up for me before I start going into my character sketches too. I think this month has been the month of beginnings for me. Not only is it the beginning of the new year, but it's been the beginning of seriously nurturing my creative practice again. It's been the beginning of relearning gouache, the beginning of relearning structure drawing. I think too often we overlook how important it is to be a beginner and how amazing it is to be a beginner. It's such a season of exploration and excitement. Yes, it's nerve-wracking too, because you don't really know what the crap you're doing, but there's also a little bit of fearlessness in a way, because there's nowhere to go but up. This month, I've definitely been reminded that it's never too late to be a beginner, and that you really do need to foster that same mindset as you begin to grow in your art. I gotta say, I'm really looking forward to seeing what this journey looks like this year. I know this is a little cheesy, and I don't say it enough, but I am so grateful for each of you for coming along on this journey with me. It genuinely makes me so happy that you enjoy watching me grow and evolve as an artist. YouTube has been such an amazing journey for me because it's allowed me to document my growth and to build a community that is so cozy and encouraging. So thank you for being here. I'd love to hear what creative things y'all are working on, so let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed chatting with me about Studio Ghibli and sketchbooks and all the things going on in my cozy little corner of the art world. And I hope you enjoyed watching me paint this Ghibli-inspired gouache illustration. Huge thank you to the Cozy Club over on Patreon for supporting my art journey. Y'all are the real MVPs, and I couldn't do it without you. If you're interested in joining the Cozy Club, taking a peek at my art supplies, snagging a mystery bag, or hanging out with me on the other corners of the interwebs, all those links are down in the description. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye guys!